Can you believe this is our 6th week? That suddenly seems to have flown to the end. It's a bit like holidays, isn't it? The first half goes steadily and then suddenly you're halfway through.
It accelerates.
And it pushes towards the final day. But the good news is we have part 2 in the new year. So you can look forward to that. Whatever the lockdown news over Christmas, you can look forward to another series of these in January and February. Adrian, I am hugely grateful to you for all you've brought us over these weeks. I'm sure that there won't be much time at the end to say thank you to you, so I'm going to say it at the beginning, just as the last people join us. I have certainly learned a lot. I've enjoyed your knowledge, enthusiasm, the passion you bring, and you're bringing us back to the text week after week to say, what does Mark say? What does the text say? So thank you for all that you have shared with us. Usual rules as we meet this evening, that we'll stay muted just to keep down the background noise, but please chip in when Adrian invites questions and responses, and we will share those together as we do. And we might end up in some breakout rooms as well, just for a bit of discussion, but we want to get the most from the last bits of text that we can. So Adrian, will I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you. That will be great. Let's open with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for your word to us, and we thank you for this opportunity that we have to get into it, to get to know it, to get to understand it, that through it you might challenge us, inform us, and grow us, and mold us, and make us a little bit more like Jesus. We ask it in his name. Amen. So I am going to share screen quickly with you. The plan for this week is always to try and get... That's not what you want to see. That's what you want to see. What can you see? Sorry.
You can see all the Zoom pictures.
That's not good.
That's it. Yeah,
Right.
That's
Thank
good.
you. So the plan for this week was always to get to about chapter 9, and I realized today it's probably not going to happen, and that's okay. So I've set a marker where the last story that I want to deal with you in this half, and we will get to that story, but we might skip over some other things before we get there, and that will be okay as well. Every time I use this, it's like you'd think I was using it for the first time. So what have we said? Important keys, context and genre. The context determines the meaning. The genre determines our approach, our response to it. Gospel is a particular genre. It's neither biography nor history, but it includes biography and it includes history. Everything we need to know is included in the story, except for the little bits that Mark might have assumed that everyone would know. All detail is important, but the key question is always to ask, what does it mean? This is our stylized Mark map of the Near Middle East in the 1st century, just to bear in mind that everything in this pale pink color would be understood as Jewish, and everything outside it in the sandy desert color, that would be the Gentile areas. We're going to deal with a lot of stories today that have to do with honor and shame. And it's probably the central cultural value that we find in the Bible is this thing about honor. Honor is almost the currency of the day. It's about respect. It's about standing in society. It's about how you can interact with others. It's about privilege. It's about how people would speak to you and how you would speak to others. We've already dealt with the story of Jairus And Jairus comes to Jesus and he does all the honor things to Jesus. He bows down before him. He addresses him highly. He asks a favor and all those sort of things. Honor and shame culture is not uncommon, but it's not our first, as Westerners, it's not our first understanding of how culture works. But if you were from a different part of the world, then certainly you would understand honor and shame culture quite well. In fact, it's probably one of the dominant ways of understanding culture in the world today. If you were watching the rugby a week ago when Argentina thumped New Zealand, didn't we all enjoy that? But it seemed that the thing that absolutely wound the Argentinian side up and set them on fire was in about the 3rd minute when their captain said, "These people don't respect us. They are not honoring us appropriately." And that just fired up this rugby team to perform out of their socks. Honor and shame is a key thing that we need to understand in the stories, and we'll see it as we journey. The other thing I want to tell you just before we start is just a little bit of history about Herod, and we'll bump into him along the way. The Jewish historian Josephus, who was a contemporary of Mark, wrote that Herod executed John the Baptist for political reasons. His preaching was stirring up insurrection and he was causing political trouble. And so as a result, a lot of scholars have dismissed Mark's account of the story and saying, oh, he's kind of just made this up. It's just a pious legend. But the thing that John the Baptist confronts Herod about is who he is marrying. That's the one big thing. He objects that Herod is going to marry his brother's wife. Now, that's not because of the genealogy or anything like that. That's because of the political connections that he's making. And Herod says, John the Baptist is saying to him, those are the wrong political connections for our country. And the second thing is that Herod was sort of half Jew. He conformed to Jewish law when he deemed it politically expedient. But otherwise, he aggressively promoted the Roman Empire and this Roman idea of Hellenization. And that Hellenization was resisted by the stern Jews. So by insisting that Herod should be accountable to Torah, then John was raising a volatile political issue in this colony of Palestine. And the tension between the puppet kings, not just this Herod, and the Jews was an ongoing thing. If you weren't fulfilling Jewish law, you were an illegitimate ruler over the Jews, according to them. And John the Baptist was always in Herod's ear saying, you're not the right leader. You're not the right person to be leading these people. So that's the overview. But I'm really confident that we've done a great job of journeying through the story so far together. And I really believe that you've understood it. So I'm going to read some of the passages and then I'm going to just allow you, think of it as a test, just to look at the text and tell me, what is this about? What is the key story in front of us? Is that okay? Big enthusiastic smiles, lovely to see. So here we go. Mark chapter 6, verse 1 to 13. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power have been done by his hands? Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house. And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. What do you see? What do you hear? I've given you a clue that some of this is about honor and about honor. But what are you hearing in the story? What are you seeing? What looks odd, unusual? Edwin.
When you speak in public about a local chap who's done well, there's always someone says, well, I remember him when he had an out. And that's what they're saying here. They're not saying anything about what he's doing now. They're saying that when they remembered him years ago, he was nothing.
It was nothing. Actually, this is Mary's boy. It's not even Joseph's boy. Hey? This is Mary's boy. Is this an illegitimate son, maybe? And actually, what is he doing, walking around teaching and all of this? This is the carpenter. Perhaps he should be at home earning a living and helping support his widowed mother, especially seeing as he was the eldest son. And all of this is about saying, as Mark puts it plainly, that Jesus amongst his own people doesn't find the respect that you might expect him to find, doesn't find the honor that he's finding in other places. Does that make sense of what you've read?
Yes.
I mean, there's more there as well, but at the same time, then he sends out the 12 who he called to him to be with him, to continue his ministry, to go out in his ministry. And so in this whole context of the ministry, here is the story that tells us just because you're following Jesus doesn't mean you're going to get what you deserve. Just because you're following Jesus doesn't mean everyone around you is going to think this is lovely. Maybe even your family and your friends are going to talk out and speak against you. Following Jesus isn't going to bring honor and reward. Perhaps it's going to bring mistrust and rejection. Let's go on. The next story shows us again. So, every time it's like the first time.
I was going to say, the fact that he said that he could do no mighty work there, except lay hands on a few sick and heal them, I would have thought I'd be thrilled.
Yeah, it sounds all right. Yeah.
It's all relative.
Yeah, I suppose. So King Herod heard of it. Heard of what? Heard of what Jesus and his followers were doing. Eh? King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. And some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason, these powers are at work in him. Others said it's Elijah, and others said it's a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she couldn't, because Herod feared John, knowing that John was a righteous and holy man, and Herod protected him. And when he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, but he liked to listen to him. And an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. And when his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I'll give you, even half of my kingdom. So she went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? And she replied, the head of John the Baptizer. And immediately the girl, the daughter, she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was deeply grieved. Yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. What do you make of that story? I mean, it starts off with the media. Who are the people saying this is John resurrected, or this is a prophet, just like any other prophet, in other words, no real concern, or this is Elijah come to tell us that the time of God's judgment is here. Or worst case scenario for Herod, this is this thing that cannot be killed. If John's been brought back to life, then Herod's power has been broken. He can no longer hold absolute power over anyone. There's a greater power. But tell me about the story. What stands out to you? I'm going to say to you, stick close to the text, but put your imagination into it and think, what's happening here?
Is there a parallel here with the Caesarea Philippi? Who do you say that I am? Who do people say that I am?
Right.
And the very same words are coming through.
There certainly is an echo of that. Yeah.
Herod's honor as the ruler overcomes his shame at having killed John the Baptist.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I mean, symbolically, John the Baptist's head is representative of his honor. Of someone's head is representative of honor. So she asks that his honor be destroyed. And here Herod has this conversation where he says, I'm an honorable man. I've made a promise. I'll keep my promise. And yet at the same time, he's saying, despite my better judgment, I'm going to kill someone who doesn't deserve it. So where is the honor in the story? Where is the shame in the story?
When Mark puts in the word immediately, he tells the guard to go off.
Yeah.
Is this more a case of the king reacting very quickly before he's got time to think about it? Then he doesn't have to take the responsibilities. Pass the book, and I don't have to think about it. Because if he stops to think about it, he'll get an awful turmoil.
Well, I think he knows what he's doing is wrong. I mean, I think that's clear in the story. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but he's going to do it anyway. Why is he going to do it anyway?
He doesn't want
breaking promise.
He doesn't want to lose faith.
He doesn't want to lose faith. He doesn't want to be seen to be breaking his oath or breaking his promise. It's kind of like, well, surely that would have been the lesser of two evils.
I shuddered at the spite of the wife behind the scenes using the daughter to give that proclamation. I had to physically shudder. It's like he was on the spot, wasn't he? So
I mean, that you can in
the room. You know, it said the girl went out and asked her mother. The mother was the aggrieved party, and she got her revenge.
Yeah,
it was. Oh, it's horrible.
And it's.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know how old this girl is. I think if we read the story, we see she's not too young, but you can kind of imagine her going to her mom and say, "Oh, Dad's offered me anything, and I can't decide whether I want a Barbie or a pony." and Mom says, "No, you want the head of John the Baptist on a platter."
Yeah.
And she tells her father that her father does it, comes out, gives it to her. She looks at it, she says, "What's this?" and gives it to her mom.
Mm.
I'm surprised she didn't ask for half the kingdom myself.
Yeah. Oh, wicked woman.
Who's in the room with Herod?
All the local bigwigs.
All the bigwigs. Yeah. Some translations it says it's the. I mean, effectively, it's the big businessmen, it's the politicians, and it's the royalty. Those are the three: royalty, big business, and politicians. Those are the people in the room that he's trying to impress. Yeah. Those are the people in the room that take such a light view of less important people's lives, that actually John becomes entirely disposable. Yeah.
It's quite possible that Herod was drunk at the time when he made the promise. If it's in the middle of a feast, at least to promise half his kingdom is quite a big thing to do.
Yeah, it's like a big pantomime story in a sense, isn't it? There's so much happening in the story. Can you imagine this young girl coming in and dancing in front of all these men? I mean, she probably wasn't probably something you'd put on in a Sunday school show. I mean, that if they were all so pleased with it, as the story goes, it's kind of like, this is not likely to be a rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It's more likely to be that she's surrounded by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and Andrew and Harvey Weinstein, and that's probably closer to what's happening in the story.
I think it's his stepdaughter. I don't think it's his daughter.
Could be.
That's the daughter of Herodias. So she's married again.
Doesn't really change the story though, does it?
No, it's like Shakespeare. It's like, yeah.
Who would want to marry Herodias anyway? She sounds a horrible woman to do this.
The marriage is about the politics. The marriage is about which kingdoms we're combining. It's not a romance. It's about the values that we holding on to. Can we go on from there?
Yeah.
So this is after it. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all they'd done. That's just the end part of that last story. So this thing of John the Baptist's death is in the middle of this whole story about what are the disciples doing, where they're going to find honor. John the Baptist has lost his honor. It's almost as if they've been told, you know what, if this is the path that you embrace, then don't expect that it's going to end very differently. Jesus said to them, verse 31, come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure, not even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized him. And they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. And as he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat. But he answered them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? And Jesus said to them, how many loaves have you got? Go and see. And when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. And then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves, and he gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. Now, hang on. Switch off everything that you knew about the story before I just read it to you. And let's talk about the story we just read. Okay? Can we do that? What did we see? What was different? What are the parts of it you haven't heard before?
Well, the population ran ahead. They must have known where they were heading to, or perhaps, or just followed the boat out at sea. So it was quicker by running, I suppose, than by going by boat.
Yeah, seems odd. Yeah.
The importance of taking time out when you've had a very full spiritual time, taking time out to be quiet, but then that being overridden by the priority of compassion when they arrived and he saw the people.
And there definitely is this rhythm in the story as we've read it of engage and disengage, engage and disengage. Yeah, yeah. What else?
The 5,000 men. No mention, obviously, of the women and children.
Yeah. Very normal kind of cultural way of expressing it. But yeah, it wouldn't be wrong to assume there were women and children there.
He introduces the idea that he's the shepherd and they're the sheep, and he's come to feed them.
Right. So I mean, he first has compassion on them because they are like sheep without a shepherd. So tell me about sheep and shepherds in the Old Testament. Do you know any passages? I don't know, at least 34. One. Say again?
Ezekiel 34, all about the good shepherds and the bad shepherds, and God promises to come as the good shepherd.
Right. And Ezekiel tells a story effectively that the politicians and the leaders of the country are like bad shepherds. But one day the good shepherd will come to lead his people. Right. Any other Old Testament passages?
So obviously Psalm 23.
Psalm 23.
I thought we were going to go there first, yeah. And that's perhaps why Mark makes that mention that the people reclined on green grass. Yeah. Green is not a very common color of grass, but it does take our minds to Psalm 23, yeah, where the good shepherd looks after his sheep and nurtures them and looks after them, yeah. Any other passages from the Old Testament? Zechariah 11, Zechariah condemns the shepherds who just sell their flock to get rich. Doesn't look after them. They're just interested in keeping sheep to get rich.
You got your Moses, you got your Laban, your Jacob, and all that pastoral background.
Isaiah 40 says God's the shepherd.
Right. And one more key passage, and there's so many, but Numbers 27, Moses prays that the people will have a leader so that they will not find themselves like a sheep without a shepherd. Okay, so Mark is bringing all those images to mind. Okay, and out of that, was it Anne who said, and he is teaching them out of the compassion that produces. Are these Jewish people or are they Gentile people?
Jewish, I would say.
Yeah, Jewish is a good guess. It sounded like a guess when you said it. Didn't sound entirely convincing, but you're right. They're on the Jewish side of the lake, so it's Jewish. And the other reason that we know is that the baskets, the word for basket is kophinos, K-O-P-H-I-N-O-S. And a kophinos isn't a basket like, if you saw this story in Sunday school, the 12 baskets were baskets, massive baskets like that. A kophinos is really more like you'd think of a lunchbox. Something about that size that you could kind of hang on your belt. And because you were Jewish, you didn't really go anywhere without food. Okay, because you never really knew whether you would be able to get a kosher food if you went out somewhere or something like that. And that's where these people find themselves. They've gone out and suddenly there are no shops. The disciples are beside themselves that there's no shops. They keep saying to Jesus, we want to buy food. These people must buy food. Jesus says, don't worry about buying food. Let's see what we've got. Let's see what you have. Let's not worry about what you don't have. And so they have a look and they come back with 5 and 2, is it? They come back with 5 and 2 and they offer it to God. They offer it to Jesus, and Jesus prays for it and just gives it back to them and says, now you go and give it to the people. And they do that, and everyone eats and everyone has enough. There's actually no mention in the story that there was an extra fish multiplying at the bottom of the basket every time they handed it out, or that the loaf didn't get any smaller every time they broke a piece off. There's none of that. Some people stood up and shared what they had, and everyone ate and there was enough. That's the story that Mark tells us. But is there more important, or is there anything else? Sorry, is there anything else you want to pull out of that story?
I think Mark describes the place as desolate. So we've got Jesus again going to a wilderness, a desolate place, and this time the crowds are following him there.
A wilderness place, a desolate wilderness place. What does that bring to mind?
Temptation? No.
Temptation, right? What did the temptation bring to mind, Old Testament?
Exile.
Turning stones into bread.
The wandering in the desert.
The wandering in the desert, where they were being formed as a people, and maybe now in the wilderness again, their new leader, who is a good shepherd, is reforming them as a nation and teaching them how to live again, because they've forgotten the lessons that they learnt wandering in the wilderness for 40 years with Moses. Yeah.
Another point is that the disciples again are being asked to take part. Jesus is wanting them to do his work for him.
Right. So disciples of Christ, as you are sitting here, listen to this story. These disciples are faced with a problem that is bigger than they can possibly imagine fixing. How can you spend 200 days' wages on buying bread? And even if you were prepared to spend 200 days' wages on buying bread, where are you going to find that amount of bread? It's just impossible. These people are hungry, they need to be fed, and we have this impossible situation. And Jesus says to these disciples who've just gone out with nothing in their pockets on a mission and come back, he says, let's look what's in your pockets, so to speak. What have you got? Oh, we've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's all. That's nothing. Jesus says, give the 5 loaves and 2 fish to God. And he takes them, and there's certainly something Eucharistic happening in our minds as he takes it and he breaks it and whatever. But then he gives the disciples what they gave him. He gives it back to them. And he says, now go and use it. And they go and they give it away, and it's more than enough. It's not even enough. It's more than enough. And when we are faced with these insurmountable mission problems or ministry problems in our church and in our lives, let's bring the little bit that we have, offer that completely to God, and then take it and use it. And with it, we will find there is more than enough.
It's an amazing miracle, isn't it, to actually dominate the physical world, doing things nobody could ever dream of doing, multiplying bread and fish. I know.
It's difficult for me to see who I'm talking to, sorry.
Sorry, it's Ian.
Ian, you're right. But actually the story Mark tells, there's no magic multiplying of food in that story. There is a miracle. Yeah. There's a miracle in that story. But the real miracle is that people open their pockets and give of themselves to care for others who are in need.
Okay, yeah, that's
a real miracle. We need more of those miracles. Yeah.
Is it important that we need to note the green grass because of it being, even in a wilderness, if the grass is green, it's got to be springtime. That's round about the Passover. Passover is about breaking bread.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't seen that. I always just noted the connection between that and Psalm 23, and he's just trying to bring all this good shepherd, bad shepherd conversation into it. So when they sit down on the green grass, it's like the Psalm 23 sheep and the green grass. But yes. I think you could be right if that's.
But in the northern hemisphere, that would coincide with springtime, the green.
Would, yeah.
So you know that may come from there. Yeah.
So as the 50 people who are in the room today, what are we going to do about world hunger?
Well,
use what
it's a giving.
Well, just let's start by feeding someone, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good start, isn't it? That's not much less than 5 loaves and 2 fish. And we just wholeheartedly do that and offer that to God, and that can be the start of the solution.
Is there a double meaning in the words of the disciples when they said, and it's already getting late? Is this something to looking towards Jerusalem already?
I don't have an answer for you. Kind of the story kind of turns inside chapter 8, so we're not quite there yet. And certainly the last half, the last 8 chapters are headed towards Jerusalem and all about Jerusalem. The first 8 chapters are more about what does the ministry of Jesus look like? What is the kind of things that Jesus is doing, and what will it mean for us if we follow him? But
there is also a link back to when they said, "Who is Jesus? Is he one of the prophets?" The fact that Elisha had also fed a large number of men.
Right. Yeah, quite right.
And therefore Jesus is showing he's in the line of the prophets.
Quite right. Well, Mark is showing that Jesus is in the line of the prophets.
Yeah.
So after that, immediately after that, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. That's ringing alarm bells in your head, all kinds of stories, isn't it? Sure it is. And saying farewell to them, Jesus went up the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the lake, and he was alone on the land. And when he saw that they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came towards them early in the morning, walking on the lake. He intended to pass them by. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and he said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, and their hearts were hardened. And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. And when they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about the whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. Go on, show me you were listening last time we were on the boat. Tell me what's happening in the story.
Well, fear. There's obviously a problem because we're against a headwind, looks like, on the story.
Okay. Where are they going from? Where are they going to?
They're going from the Jewish side to the
yes.
Gentile side.
Yes, top of the class. Yeah. Absolutely. From the Jewish side to the Gentile side, and they do not like it. But this time, Jesus has said to them, you go. Eh? You should be learning by now what this is about. Now, I'm going to go and pray. You go off and carry on. and there's a storm. And there's a great storm. And as Mark paints the picture, there's this growing distance between Jesus and the disciples. And sometime in the night, Jesus walks out on the water. I don't have to retell the story. What else do you see? What else do you notice in there?
Why does Mark say he was intending to pass them by? What was the purpose of that?
Okay. Any ideas?
Is he not going ahead of them to the other side, ready to greet them? I don't know.
Probably not. Okay.
Perhaps he just wanted to see how they would deal with the situation.
It's kind of a play on words, really. So it sounds like he's going to go past them, but at the same time, it's the Greek equivalent of Moses hiding in the rock, and God appears all around him. God passes him by, but he's not in the storm, and he's not in the in the lightning and all those things. He's in the still storm voice, and it's the same passing by. It's an epiphany moment. It's a presence of God moment that he's kind of hinting at in the story. So it's intended as a maybe as a revelatory kind of thing. But when does the peace come for them?
When he gets into the boat.
When he gets into the boat, when Jesus is with them again, and then they find peace in this thing. But honestly, doesn't sound like Jesus is happy, eh? Yeah. Do you still not understand? Are your hearts hard? That's Pharaoh disease, you know? Do you still not understand? I've been this whole thing about the loaves and how there's always going to be enough. And there's enough for the Jews, there's enough for the Gentiles, there's enough for everyone. And and then it follows with a story of all the things that are just sort of summaries of what's gone before. I'm going to move us through quickly. So what happens now is they're back in Jewish territory. They're the Pharisees. And there's a long, complicated discussion, and I'm not going to get into it, but the gist of the discussion is, what are the things that make for inclusion, and what are the things that make inclusion difficult? What are the things that stop us being an integrated Jewish and Gentile community? What are the things that stop us from being a community that includes everyone? Okay, that's the story that follows immediately. I'll read it to you. Now, when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? And he said to them, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. And then he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever speaks evil of father or mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells father or mother, whatever support you might have for me, I've put in a trust to God, then you no longer permit doing anything for father or mother, thus making void the word of God through your tradition that you've handed on. And you do many things like this. And then he called the crowd again and he said to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand there's nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. And when he'd left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, do you also fail to understand? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer? Notice he declared all foods clean. And he said, It's what comes out of a person that defiles. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come. Listen to the list. Fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. I'm going to leave that story. So remember everything we've spoken about the geography, and remember everything we've spoken about honor. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre, and he entered a house and did not want anyone to know that he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. A woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin, and she begged Jesus to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Then Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went by the way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. And they brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged Jesus to lay his hands on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephata," that is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." What do you see? What do you hear? Have you heard the story before?
Yes, many times.
It's a familiar story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where did we hear it?
Well, he's back in the land of the 10 cities again, isn't he?
Well, that's further on, but let's start with the lady who's north of him in Syrophoenicia, a Gentile woman. Yeah, also in Gentile territory. It sounds a bit like
sounds like
Jairus. Yes, it sounds like Jairus' daughter. And I mean, she's a woman. She's not Jairus, and she's not Jewish, and she's not the. In fact, the story is really about all the offensive ways that she speaks to Jesus. She's a woman speaking to him in public. She's a Gentile who shouldn't be approaching him. She's making demands. She's arguing with him. She argues back. I mean, all of these things should be making you feel on edge about the offense, the shame, and the honor and the exchange of it that's happening. And then to make it worse than you could possibly ever have imagined, Jesus, the man, the Jew, says, "You know what? You're right. You're right." And in that story, move beyond it being about Jews and Gentiles and Jesus and one woman. There's a story about us as disciples. It's a story about how we are going to have to put our pride and our offense aside if we're going to go and minister and bring people into the kingdom. Anything else you see there?
Right at the end,
yeah,
he says to her, "Go home, your daughter as well."
Mm.
Now, what woman with a sick child would go home without the doctor? That's an act of faith.
It's an act of faith. Yeah, she does not have to query him. She does not have to check on it. He says it's done, so it's done. I think that's what I would read into it. Yeah.
I mean, the faith of Jesus spread far and wide by then. Tyre up in the north west of the area. Quite a distance, I would think. I wouldn't know, but quite a distance from Lake Galilee.
Absolutely. So actually what's happened is he's moved north along the sea to this region of Tyre and Sidon and Syrophoenicia, where she comes from. And then as the story progresses, he moves east and south to that area. So it's a really unlikely journey that he's making geographically. But actually, Mark's not telling us about a geographical journey. Mark is telling us that Jesus is ministering in the Gentile areas and taking the good news to these people of what God is doing in the world. It's this huge story of inclusion. And what happens in the story? Actually, those who get to hear Jesus have their ears opened. They get to really hear Jesus, so much so that they hear it and they go out and they tell it. I mean, that's a conversion story if ever there was one.
Why did Jesus command them not to tell?
That is the biggest secret in Mark's gospel. Okay, it's called the Messianic secret, and I promise you we'll talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it now. Is that okay? All right. So where are we? We've had this deaf mute that Jesus has brought to life. Able to hear and then speak. Okay, and then I'm going to share screen again quickly, because here's another familiar story. In fact, Mark now tells the story of the feeding of the 4,000. Okay, so this is another feeding story. And where does it happen?
It's a wedding, isn't it? No.
Decapolis?
It happens in those days. So which days are those?
While he's wandering around.
While he's wandering around where?
Gentile area.
In the Gentile area. In those days that he was doing this grand tour through the Gentile areas. Those days, yeah. In those days, when there was again a great crowd without anything to eat, he called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion for the crowd because they've been with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come a great distance. His disciples said, how can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? And he asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said 7. Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute, and they distributed them to the crowd. And they also had a few small fish, and after blessing them, he ordered that these 2 should be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Now there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. Mark reckons by now, like me, that you understand the story, that you know what's going on here. Eh? It's Gentile territory. The word for baskets escapes me at the moment, but it's a different word. It's a different kind of basket. It's not a Jewish lunchbox. It's a bigger Greek basket that he's talking about. But it's the same story. We've heard it before. Just one of these parallel stories where he's spoken about what's happening in the Gentile territory and the Jewish territory. Jewish territory and Gentile territory. You with me? Do you want to raise anything that out of there that I've skipped over? That's really...
You haven't skipped over anything, but the point is that in the temptation in the desert, the devil said to Jesus, you could turn stones into bread, which again is another miracle against norms of science and the physical. He's obviously expanding the amount of bread miraculously, again, the second time.
No, he hasn't obviously done that. He hasn't obviously done it. If he'd done that, Mark would have told us. He ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground. He took the loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples, and they distributed them to the crowd. And they had a few small fish.
They're all full.
Blessing them, he ordered that those 2 should be distributed, And they ate and were filled.
In the light of the Syrophoenician woman saying that even the crumbs under the table will feed us, here is a superabundance. 7 baskets full.
7 is a significant number as well. I mean, it's this kind of this number of perfection. And so is there kind of a picture of when the Gentiles and the Jews come together, when everyone comes together, that somehow creation or the world reaches a perfect state?
And we have the difference between the Gentile feeding having 7 baskets left over,
right?
But the Jewish feeding having 12 baskets,
right?
And 7's a good number, but 12 for the Jew is super important.
Super
the 12
important.
tribes.
So for the Jews, 12 is always the recreation of Israel, Israel coming in its perfection. The number 7 here is more the completion of creation. On the 7th day, God rested. So both of those images being held together. Yeah. So I'm maybe pushing a little bit to you to say, don't easily say, oh, but it's just the magic multiplication of bread. Okay, because well, who knows? What I've said to you for 5 weeks now is ask the what does it mean question. Okay, so if it's a magical multiplication of bread and fish, what does that mean? And if it is the transformation of people that they might share what they have so that everyone has enough, what does that mean? And I think in both cases we might agree that when we bring what we have to God, there will be enough for the transformation of the world. Whether God does it magically through multiplication or whether God does it miraculously through converting my wallet.
So then maybe the miracle is that the people are satisfied.
Yeah.
Not that they are fed, not that there was enough, not that there was plenty. The miracle is that they are satisfied. They have enough. They have eaten what they need. Jesus has provided the very thing that was required.
Finest bread I will provide till their hearts are satisfied.
So they faced with this seemingly insurmountable problem. Again, by bringing what they have to Jesus, giving it to Jesus, they find that there is enough and the problem is overcome. We can take that message from either the 5,000 or the 4,000 and put that into our lives and our ministries and our churches. We will see miracles happen.
There's no wastage, is there? I mean, in the end, nothing's being wasted. Even the scraps are being collected.
Well, that always worries me about it a little bit, because if it would be miraculously produced, then why would we just produce more than was actually needed?
To prove there shouldn't be any wastage, really. There should not be any wastage.
All right. Let's move.
Yes. Is this a picture of the kingdom of heaven as well? That if everybody shares, then that's what God's kingdom looks like. And he was preaching that, but this to the disciples was a visual aid of that, if you like, living it.
Absolutely, Anne. It's gospel. This is the visual aid. The gospel story is the visual aid, putting in and explaining it in ways that we can understand. But this is a story. This is the mission of God being played out through Jesus, that all people will come together and share what they have in a fair way, like we did in the desert with the manna. This is just another manna story in a sense. Like that, that's God's ambition, if that's the right word, God's plan for the world, that actually we'll all get to learn to live alongside each other, to share what we have so that everyone has enough and no one will hoard and no one will have too much. And you know what? When we bring the bit that we offer to God and we give it to God, we'll find we're well on our way. When we stand aside and we think, how are you and I going to bring the kingdom of God into being? We look at it and we say, impossible task. Can't be done, Jesus. Can't be done. Where would you find money to buy that amount of bread? No, let's bring the little that we have and offer it to God. So let's look where we are. So immediately Jesus got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, asking for a sign from heaven. Give us a theological proof. And he sighed deeply in his spirit. And he said, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, he went across to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they only had one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. And they said to one another, it's because we have no bread. And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? Do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? Talk to me. What do you see? What do you hear? What's there?
Well, God will provide.
Yeah.
It's like the vaccines. We'll get them eventually.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, and we'll be able to give them to the poorer countries.
That would seem like a fair distribution in a godly manner, wouldn't it?
There's no point in just making enough for one country.
Yeah, of course.
You've got to provide for the whole world.
Isn't this reinforcing his teaching that it just won't go in, and how much are we like that? It's the 3rd attempt he's had at trying to get the message across. The thing that surprises me is what you said about the lunch boxes. They must be a bit of a motley crew because they keep forgetting their lunch.
So they get in this boat. It's not obvious in the English. It's not obvious, but it is there that they get in the boat and they say, we haven't got any loaves of bread here. And because we've only got one loaf. And there's this whole conversation about loaves and loaf and loaves and that sort of thing. And Jesus is saying to them, we only need one loaf. We only need one loaf that we will share. We only need one substance to come around as one community. Yeah, but I love your expression. I mean, I forget how you expressed it, but Jesus must be banging his head on the side of the boat by this point. They just don't get it, do they? They've seen him touring Jewish areas, Gentile areas. He's seen miracles of providing, miracles of helping and healing. You've seen how he's confronted everything that's wrong in society, and they just don't seem to get it. The passages that it follows there's a whole lot that Jesus says. It's a quote from Isaiah, I think. Let me just find it quickly here. Verse 17, and becoming aware of Jesus, then why are you talking about having no bread? Now listen, Do you still not perceive or understand? There's got to be frustration in that sentence. Are your hearts hardened? Hardened hearts are hearts that know what is right, but don't do it. Okay? Think Herod. I shouldn't be killing this man, but I'm going to. Think Pharaoh. I should be letting these people go, but I'm not going to. Hard hearts. The bad disease for disciples to have, to know what is right and not do it. He says to them, think gospel. He says, do you have eyes and fail to see? Have you journeyed all this way with me and your eyes have not opened? Do you have ears and fail to hear? You've heard what I've said. Has it really fallen on the wrong soil and not taken any root? And then worst of all, you don't get worse than this. And do you not remember? Because for a Jewish person, remembrance is at the very heart of their faith. Remember the God who brought you out of Egypt. Remember the God who fed you in the wilderness. Remember what God has done for you. And to not remember is to just have turned your back on your faith. And then he goes through the numbers with them, as was it Peter who did it for us, and just says, don't you remember for the Jews, the coming of the kingdom and the 12? Don't you remember for the Gentiles, we brought them in, and there was the completion of creation in the 7? And then he says to them, do you not understand? And I have to put my hand up sometimes and say, yeah, Jesus, sometimes I just don't understand, which is sometimes me at my best, because at my worst, I know exactly what you want and I don't want to do it. Anything else you want to bring up from that story? Then we're going to look at one more story and close.
I think Jesus was challenging their basic concepts as Jews. He was leading them into an area they hadn't been, both physically and spiritually, and they just couldn't get there. Mm. It was everything that they believed for all their lives was being overturned.
Mm. Mm. And sometimes scarily, John, we're in the same place.
Yes.
As Christians, that
yes.
God wants to lead us into new things or different things or places we haven't been before. And we don't really want to cross this lake in this boat, you know, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Mm. I'm going to read to you from Mark chapter 8, starting at verse 22. I'm just going to read the 4 verses. Let me put it on the screen. "21. Then he said to them, do you not yet understand? And they came to Bethsaida." Gentiles out of the lake. "They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to Jesus and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he'd put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, 'Can you see anything?' And the man looked up and said, 'I can see people, but they look like trees walking.' Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he the man looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then Jesus sent him away to his home, saying, 'Do not even go into the village.'" So as our crowning piece of 6 weeks of journey together, okay, this is the passage we're going to leave it with. All right? Think gospel, think everything I need to know is in the story, think I've got to apply my gospel mind imagination to understand what is in the story and understand the images that Mark is painting. What does it sound like Mark is saying? What does it sound like it means for you and me as disciples?
If we're talking about the partial healing, obviously the man didn't have sufficient faith initially.
I wouldn't pin it on the man. I don't think Mark clearly says to us that he wasn't healed because he didn't have enough faith. That's not in the story.
Where was the problem then, do you think?
I'm asking you.
Incomplete healing, really, initially.
There is. There's an incomplete healing that's happening there. It's like, did Jesus botch this? I mean, why did Mark include it if Jesus botched it? What else might be in the story?
It follows on from what has been happening before. The disciples have got a very partial understanding of what's going on, and this is almost like an acted parable.
It is an acted parable.
I don't think there's a problem with Jesus being able to heal a fella, and I don't think there's necessarily a problem with the man either. But this is actually Jesus saying, this is what you folks are like. You're looking and not, going back to the words from Isaiah, you're looking, but you're not really seeing. And this is what's happening with this man.
Okay. That sounds like that makes sense, some sense of the text. Anything else?
Yeah, there's always movement. Jesus always seems to be going from A to B. So here, he takes the man and leads him out of the village, which seems to be significant in some way. The healing couldn't happen where he was. It had to be a change in position.
Yeah, he's kind of had to move on, and then at the end of the story he says, don't even go back into the village. Yeah, don't even go into the village. So he's had to move on in his life. Yeah, leave something behind. Yeah, what else?
That actually echoes the other miracle on the Gentile side, that he took aside the deaf man and he touched his ears and then spat on his tongue. That was, sort of two bits.
And there's supposed to, in the Jewish way of thinking, there's supposed to be something happens when you spit on his tongue or you put saliva in his eyes. He's supposed to get unclean. But actually it turns out that it's Jesus' power and holiness that is infectious, not the uncleanness or the fault with the person. Yeah.
It's a spiritual vision, maybe.
I think you're right.
Rachel,
yes.
Yeah.
Could it be a gradual healing rather than just we see the instant healing? Could this not be a gradual healing rather than just that instant healing that we're seeing?
I think there is something in that it's undoubtedly it's a two-part healing and it's a representative story. So it's possible that it's not two instants if we're going to understand it in our own life. So perhaps there, as we might apply it, there might be more time in the story. Yeah, these are all great insights. I'm so excited. What else?
The coal in I can't remember which book it's in, where the coal touches the lips and the man can prophesy.
Isaiah, is it? Yeah.
I can't remember where it is.
Isaiah 6.
Is it Isaiah 6?
you.
It's almost that something holy's touched his body and something.
Yeah. Okay.
A little bit like that.
And that's the same chapter in which Isaiah then goes on to speak about seeing and not understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it's the same kind of transformation. Good.
The blind man knows that he can see men, but they look like trees.
What does that mean, Jeff?
Well, he hasn't fully grasped what the situation is. He's looking but not fully seeing.
Right.
Depends whether he's blind from birth.
Perhaps what he should see, and he's not actually seeing it.
So can I take all your bits that you've given me, and I'm going to try and weave them back into the story, and then we'll say, hang on, maybe this is our story. I promise you, we're going to say that, because they bring a blind man to Jesus, and Jesus takes the man by the hand in another village, and Jesus lays. And let's start again. Some people bring a blind man to Jesus, and they beg Jesus to touch the blind man. And Jesus takes the blind man by the hand and leads the blind man out of the village. And when Jesus puts saliva on his eyes, Jesus lays his hands on the blind man. And Jesus asks the man, "Can you see anything?" And undoubtedly something has happened, because he can see something. His eyes are open. I can see people. But they look like trees walking. He sees people, but he doesn't really notice them. Or he sees people, but they look like things. He sees people, but they look like tools. He sees people, but they look like the kind of thing that you use for something else. He sees people, but he doesn't see them in their fullness. Okay? Then listen how the story changes in verse 25. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again. Okay, not much of a change there. And this is the first point in the story at which this man does something. And the man looked intently. The man put some effort into this thing. The man looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And I want to suggest, I can't see you. Can you see me?
I can see you.
There we are. I want to see you. I want to suggest to you that this is what is happening in the story. That we come to Jesus and we are converted. And it is entirely by grace that we are brought into the kingdom and our eyes are opened. And at that point, we don't understand everything and we don't know everything. We see people, but they look like things. We haven't been fully converted. And we need our eyes to be opened again. We know there's something good happening here, but we need our eyes open widely. And it's at that point that the man starts to do something. And we're called to be a part of our healing. And we're called to be a part of putting an effort into our discipleship and putting some trouble into following Jesus. And we're not just saying it's all by grace, it's all by grace, it's all by grace. But actually it calls for a response in me. And when that response happens from my heart, my eyes are opened again. And I see people and they look like people. You know what people are for? People are for loving and for caring. People are for feeding. They're not for using. And then I know that my eyes are open. And so we're journeying through this gospel. And I know that we've struggled with bits as we've gone along, and there have been bits that we haven't quite grasped yet. And at this juncture, our prayer is this: God, open my eyes fully. Help me to follow you closely. Can I close in prayer?
Yep.
Yeah, great.
That is our prayer, Lord. Come and lead us and follow us, and even in our uncertainty and our bumbling and our, yes, we do not yet understand. Come and help us to open our eyes. Come and open our eyes again and help us to look intently and to see and to love and to care and to give and to be a little bit more like Jesus. For we ask it in his name. Amen.